Hello dear viewers, support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it, and also make sure you comment your thoughts. Now let's start the video. Robb Stark. It had been 2 months since Robb's uncle had shown the white. In that time, so much had happened around the realm. The lords of the Stormlands, Dorne, the Vale, and the Crownlands had all departed for their homelands. The very next day, moving with purpose and speed that surprised even Robb. Even Benjen had departed a few days after he had arrived, taking the fastest ship available north. He knew of Robb's plans and promised to pass them on to the new Lord Commander. Robb's father had sent a raven to Robb weeks ago. Bran had told him that it was time to begin manning the wall around the time Benjen made it to King's Landing. Now roughly 10,000 Northmen had been assembled and dispersed along the wall. 10,000 wildlings had already been placed at the wall, bringing the number of defenders over 20,000 between 9 castles, 3 for the Watch, 3 for the Northmen, and 3 for the Free Folk. The message that Robb had sent back to his father was long, but the instructions were needed. The rest of the armies of Westeros would bring 10,000 men each, an order that had been passed along to the other Lord Paramounts. Robb always wanted a system of riders set up along the King's Road, and each of the roads that branched off from it, including the ocean road that ran from Casterly Rock to Highgarden. Lines of communication would be vital, and Robb would rather be overly cautious. Lord Commander Corin had sent a raven to Robb, telling him that weapons of dragonglass were being made as fast as possible, and dispensed to every castle, spears, daggers, and arrows. Thankfully, ships were still coming in daily with plenty of the glossy black stone. A few of Robb's council had also left the capital, meaning that the king and queen had been busy finding temporary replacements for them. Lord Selwyn Tarth, Brienne's father, had come to take over Lord Royce's position as Master of Laws. Ser Davos would take over as Master of Ships and keep his station as Commander of the Watch. Ian Hawker would also take over as Master of War and keep his position as Commander of Robb's Household Guard. Lady Enoya, Sam, Alec Reed, and the Queen of Thorns would remain in the city. Ser Loras would fill in for Brienne's during meetings as he and Ser Hobber would remain behind to care for the royal family. Robb had also invited 3 knights from Renly's former Kingsguard. Ser Eamon Coy, Ser Gaillard Morrigan, and Ser Parman Crane to come to the capital and retake their positions at Margaery's protectors. Positions they had held during the War of the Five Kings. Robb was set to leave the next day, bringing 2,000 knights from the Crownlands north with him. The Blackfish would travel with him to Harrenhal, where he would wait for the Stormlands and Dorne to join him before continuing north. The king was looking over reports in his office. Messages from his commanders, Caingmay, Yoon, and Edmure, had met at the Twins and were currently making their way north. Garland had just left for Harrenhal with 2,000 knights, 4,000 archers, and 4,000 infantrymen, along with a long line of wagons filled with food. Willis had also promised another 3,000 light lancers, which would see wagons of food and supplies continue north during the war. With the king's company having already moved north, Robb's good brother knew how risky it would be to send wagons north without suitable protection against bandits. The Baratheon brothers, Gendry and Edric, were waiting for the last of their men, but they had promised that they would be marching out by the end of the week. As for Prince Oberyn and the Dornish, they had reached Starfall, but it would still be roughly 2 or 3 weeks until they reached Harrenhal. The final 2 messages that Robb had were from Jon and Lord Harlaw. The Ironborn had managed to rally 3,000 warriors, and had landed at Eagle's Roost. Now they were marching towards Castle Black, where they would be given their assignments by Robb's father and Lord Commander Corin. Jon and Daenerys had begun their flight north 2 days ago. Neither Jon nor Daenerys knew how long it would take them, but a raven had been sent to Castle Black, telling Robb and Jon's father to expect them. Jon had also added that Sarah Barristan and Sarah Jorah had set sail with 500 Unsullied towards the wall. Altogether, over 60,000 men and 2 dragons were currently making their way north. Robb hoped it was enough. Brienne knocked on the door of his office. "Your Grace, he's here." Robb set all his reports to the side of his desk, covering them with some meaningless report about the current construction of what Margaery was working on with the Volantene. When he was ready, he called back, "Send him in." The door opened to reveal a nervous Septon dressed in ornate, flashy clothing. He wore a long white cape with intricate designs etched in gold running along its edges. His robes were assorted colors of royal purple, light blue, bright gold, and creamy white. "High Septon," Robb said curtly, gesturing towards the chair before him. "Please sit. Would you like some wine?" The Septon, Terence, if Robb remembered correctly, nodded quickly, and sat down as Robb poured him a chalice. When the man had his drink, he seemed to relax a little. Robb could understand his awkwardness. Ever since the High Sparrow tried to kill Robb, the Faith and the Crown have not been on the best of terms. "How do you like your new position?" Robb asked, making idle conversation.
"It's good," the man muttered, not making direct eye contact with the king.
The differences between Terence and the High Sparrow were numerous, and the similarities were next to none. Where the High Sparrow had a will of steel, Terence's was made from a stalk of grass. The High Sparrow wore a simple burlap sack as clothing. Terence's appearance was an overabundance of color. The High Sparrow would meet your eye, and his stance on anything was like stone, immovable. Terence, on the other hand, was completely incapable of meeting Robb's gaze, and looked as if his own shadow would frighten him. The only similarity between the two men was their faith, but Terence was nothing like the fanatic the High Sparrow was. "I'm glad to hear it," Robb said cheerfully, clasping his hands together. "Now, as you might have heard, I'm going away for a while." Terence choked on his wine. As he attempted to compose himself, Robb's smile melted, and he leaned forward. When he spoke, there was a snap of command in his voice. It was unmistakable. "Look at me, Septon," Robb ordered, his voice low and dangerous. When Terence met his gaze, Robb saw nothing but utter fear in his eyes. "You will keep your order in line," Robb warned. "If you do not, and I hear that there were problems, then you and I shall have a very unpleasant conversation." "Understood?" "Yes, Your Grace." Terence stammered out. The man looked close to pissing himself. Robb forced the man to meet his gaze for a while longer, which made Terence visibly shake before the Northman finally broke it off and leaned back in his chair. The High Septon was suddenly not interested in his wine. He set the chalice back on the desk and seemed to recede into his mind. "You may go," Robb snapped. The man practically fled from the room. When he was gone, Robb reached towards his reports, intent on getting back to them. He had a lot of work to catch up on, and even though Tyrion had been a godsend to him, there was only so much work that he could do that was intended for Robb. However, before Robb could begin his work, he felt someone else in the room. "Come out," Robb ordered, gazing around the room as his right hand drifted towards Claw. "There's no need for that, Your Grace, I assure you," Varys said, appearing from behind the hidden door that led to Maegor's tunnels. "Virus," Robb growled. "I should have known." The spider folded his hands inside his robe. "If I may be so bold, I am rather surprised you managed to sense my presence. I and your presence will soon be acquainted with the edge of my blade, if you don't tell me why. In the blazes you're in my office. You've been banished from Westeros. I gave the order," Robb said, rising from his desk, sword still in hand. Varys didn't look worried in the slightest. "Oh, I've come and gone when I've felt like I needed to," Varys replied, walking over to a nearby window that looked out over Blackwater Bay. "Word has reached me, finally, of the little project you and your council have been working on. It's no longer a secret, and it's certainly no little project," Robb said. "The long night is coming." "Yes, it is," Varys agreed. "And you've managed to unite the entirety of the Seven Kingdoms behind you. I doubt there's been a king in the past 40 years who's capable of such a feat. Rhaegar before he abducted my aunt," Robb offered. Varys nodded. "Point taken." "Why are you here, Varys?" Robb said, half sliding Claw from its scabbard. The threat was clear. "I've come to wish you luck," Varys said seriously. "For the past 2 months, my little birds have come from all across Westeros, singing their songs in my ear. After hearing about the White and the announcement of the Long Night, I expected to hear an uproar from those loyal to the Seven who are one. I have heard nothing of the sort. If anyone had a problem with my plan, I would have heard about it by now," Robb replied. "Yes, Reed is very good at what he does," Varys said with a vague wave of his hand. "Nevertheless, I have said what I came here to say." As the eunuch moved towards the hidden door, Robb stopped him. "Varys, stop," Robb said, taking a step towards him. "You cross a sea just to say good luck. You understand why I don't believe that." Varys turned around. "I do?" he replied. "But I assure you that I have no other schemes in play. The Long Night has suspended the game for now. It is clear to me now that Westeros is in the best hands with you. I will interfere no more. I don't believe you, Robb said bluntly. Varys shrugged. You can believe what you like, Wolf King, but I have only ever wanted to do what was best for Westeros. It has taken me some time, but your Lord Hand was right. You, Robb Stark, are what is best for Westeros. Before Robb could say another word, Varys disappeared into the tunnel and was gone in an instant, leaving Robb confused and stunned in the middle of his room. You Reptilites. The former knight looked along the column of men marching by. A long line of gold and red armored men carrying spears, swords, shields. Other men, garbed in black leather breastplates and caps, carried longbows with quivers of arrows over their shoulders. Everywhere Jaime looked, he saw the rampant golden lion of Casterly Rock. Smaller banners flew lesser beasts, unicorns burning trees, charging boars and other such things, but the lion stood out among all else. As did Jaime. He wore gilded chainmail under a studded black breastplate. His red cape was lined with black fur. As always, his longsword and dagger hung from his war belt. Gone was the highly polished golden armor and the roaring lion helm. Gone was the Golden Knight, the pride of House Lannister, the Kingslayer. The arrogance, pompous sister-fucking man was gone. Jaime Lannister, humbled and with a new purpose, had taken his place. Eddard Marbrand, Jaime's longtime friend, was next to him, looking like a true lord of the Westerlands. Despite all that Jaime had done, Eddard was a good enough man that he saw Jaime for the man he was now, not who he was back then. You're brooding, Adam noticed. Not something I've seen you do often. I'm surprised more men aren't, Jaime replied, shaking himself from his thoughts. We're not walking into a meadow with flowers. Adam only chuckled darkly. Jaime and 10,000 Westermen had met with Lord Royce and Lord Tully at the Twins, each of whom were leading 10,000 men of their own. Once the three forces had joined together, they began the long trek north. As of now, they were another day's march from Moat to Kylan, which made Jaime sigh with relief. He didn't trust the Neck, nor the simple-minded among his men. He couldn't afford to lose any men to lizard lions or drowning, not when they had a much darker enemy waiting for them at the wall. How did Lord Tommen take being left behind? Adam asked, making idle conversation. Not well, Jaime sighed. Flashback. Why? Tommen shouted angrily. I can fight. Jaime scowled as he collected his armor from the armory. He had left it to the maester to inform Tommen that he would be left behind to guard the rock. Of course, Jaime should have foreseen the boy coming straight to him for an answer. After all, the king had placed Jaime in charge of the Westermen, which meant that it was Yami's decision as to who went north and who didn't. You slew simple-minded peasants, Jaime replied curtly, sliding the chainmail over his torso before cinching his belt tightly around his waist. This is not a war you want to be in, Tommen, and as it stands, you're simply not ready to fight in a real battle. But you taught me. Yes, I did. Jaime roared, rounding on the boy. Since I am your mentor, I know better than you what you're capable of, and what you're ready for. Facing a horde of the undead when all you faced are peasants is not what you're ready for. I slew a knight. He underestimated you. Jaime countered. I promise you that a white will not. What's the point of training me if you won't allow me to fight? Tommen asked finally, tears threatening in his eyes. Jaime grabbed him by the shoulder and lowered himself so that he was at eye level with the boy. I train you with the hope that you will never have to fight, he explained. Not so that you will seek out fights. The man who lives the longest is the man who fights the least. I don't understand, Tommen said, wiping his eyes. It was moments like these that made Jaime remember just how young Tommen was. He had grown up a lot since the death of his mother and Joffrey, and a lot of that had to do with the fact that he was finally out of the shadow of his tyrant brother. But Tommen was still a boy who didn't understand the world like Jaime did. One day you will, Jaime promised. Tommen, you are Tyrion's heir, and the last male descendant of Tywin Lannister, your grandfather. You are simply too valuable to lose. The former knight stood up and began to put on his breastplate, continuing to speak as he did. I, on the other hand, am not. Hence why I am going north, and you are staying here. But... No buts, Tommen, Jaime said, finishing with the buckles on his breastplate and grabbing his cloak. You will soon be Lord of Casterly Rock, and you must do what is in the best interest of our family. Understood? Yes, uncle, Tommen said sadly. Jaime began to walk by the boy, but but he stopped and laid a comforting hand on his shoulder, bowing his head. He knew how much Tommen looked up to him and wanted to make both him and Tyrion proud. "I'm proud of you, Tommen. I know that you'll be a much better man than I ever was," Jaime said quietly before leaving the room. Flashback. "He'll understand when he's older," Jaime continued. "Do you think he'll ever forgive you for leaving him behind?" Adam asked. Fubman shook his head. "Whether he does or not is out of my hands. Faced with the same situation again, I wouldn't hesitate to do the same thing again. He needs to live, more so than myself, and maybe even Tyrion." "Master Lannister," an outrider called, galloping up to the warrior. "Report," Jaime snapped crisply. "Lord Royce wishes to inform you that wildlings have been spotted just north of Moat Cailin," the man replied. Jaime shared a look with Adam before looking back at the man. "Does Lord Royce think they will attack us?" The man hesitated before shaking his head. "He said to tell you that they are shoveling snow." "Shoveling snow?" Adam frowned. Jaime snorted. "I understand. Thank you." The outrider bowed in his saddle and left the two men behind. When he was gone, Adam turned towards his friend, still looking very confused. "Is this some kind of code?" he asked. Jaime shook his head. "Eddard Stark, you quick-thinking bastard," he muttered before answering his friend. "There are tens of thousands of wildlings on the gift. Not all of them can man castles along the wall. Lord Stark or the king must have sent some south to clear the king's road of snow. This will speed up our travel." Adam nodded. "Not a bad idea. The Starks know how to fight in winter." Jaime grunted. "Thank the gods for that." Adam agreed as the two Westermen continued their march north. "Tyrion Lannister, Master Reed, this is very irregular, even for you," Tyrion grumbled as he waddled into the room. The dark sky that glowed and shimmered outside the window showed just how late it was, but the small group of individuals were anything but tired. Reed sat at the head of the table, wrapped in a dark cloak as he propped his head up with one hand, slightly reclining in his seat. The towering form of the Hound sat next to him, with the slim and beautiful Sansa Stark by his side. Ethan Hawker sat across from the Stark girl, waiting patiently as Tyrion took his seat across from the Hound, bringing the meeting of the strange group to order. "I would not have summoned you if I did not think that you could help me," Reed grunted. 2 months ago, I discovered a plot against the crown. The conspirators planned to disguise their force as part of the king's company to gain entrance to the Red Keep and take the queen hostage. Tyrion leaned forward. His slight annoyance with the lateness and secrecy of the meeting was now replaced by a desire to see the traitors brought to justice before they can cause problems for the kingdom. "Who are these men and how have you come across their plot?" Circa Dosney Kettleblack, Lord John Linderly, Hugh Blount, and Maritrant make up the group. I found correspondences between them and the High Sparrow, after the Queen ordered me to look into the High Sparrow's allies, Reed explained. There were more, some minor lords and knightly houses in the Riverlands, but they seem to have dropped the plot after the High Sparrow's death and cut off contact from Kettleblack and the others. "You're still watching them, aren't you?" Ian said, crossing his arms. "It wasn't a question." "Of course," Reed said. "There were 3 other allies from the Reach, but Jaime Lannister and the Green Man took care of them. So the 4 men are all who are left," Tyrion said slowly. "Why are they going after the crown and how did the High Sparrow manage to convince them to fight for him?" "Kettleblack, Blant, and Trant, all are loyal to the Lannisters, specifically Cersei," Sansa answered. Ser Osmond and Osfried were sellswords who worked for her. Tyrion almost smacked himself in the head. "Of course! Trent and Blant are related to Ser Meryn and Ser Boros." "Who?" Ian asked. "Knights in Joffrey's Kingsguard," the Hound grunted. "Shit knights and worse men. They were placed there because of their loyalty to Cersei, and nothing else." "You said the Kettleblacks are sellswords," Ian said, speaking to Sansa. "Why is this one so loyal to Cersei?" "He was also loyal to Petyr Baelish, her severed Cersei, but he was paid by Littlefinger," Reed answered. "The same for Linderly. He was one of Petyr's staunchest supporters in the Vale. That's how the High Sparrow managed to swap them to fight for him. They wanted vengeance for their loss of status, and the old bastard was going to help them get it by killing the king." Tyrion sighed. "What else do you know, Reed?" "They can muster about 1,000 men," the spymaster said. "Not enough to storm the city, but enough to take over the Red Keep, if they gained access to the castle. They plan to do this while disguised as members of the king's company. They will be assembling their men at Sedorosny's Manor just west of here, where the Blackwater Rush splits. Why not kill them now? The Hound growled. We know where they are and what they're doing. Because we need proof that they're guilty, Reed said. The High Sparrow attacking the king and the three lords kidnapping the Green Man was reason enough for their deaths. If we slaughter 1,000 men out of blue, then explain ourselves will not be a good look for the crown. You speak as if you already have a plan, Sansa commented. Tyrion smiled to himself. Although this was a serious meeting, the young woman was handling herself amazingly well. I do, my lady, Reed replied. We know what they'll do, and so we have time to counter it. They mean to cut the queen off from her best fighters before going after her. That includes Aeon, the Kingsguard, Seaworth, and others. They mean to do this at night so that we won't see them coming, but it's the exact opposite. They won't see us coming, Ian said, finishing the sentence. Exactly, Reed nodded. Once we have the 4 men in chains, it'll be easy to round up the rest of their men. The city watch outnumbers them 10-1. Why not tell the queen all this? Sansa asked. Because she has enough on her plate as it is, Reed answered. The 5 of us wield enough power to see to it that this attempt is foiled and that the conspirators are brought to justice. Very well, Tyrion sighed. I will ensure that Seaworth is informed of this as well. Thank you for bringing this to our attention, Reed. It's my job, the Spymaster replied simply. Margaery Stark. Margaery found the Grand Maester, predictably surrounded by books. He was poring through a mountain of them, flipping page after page filled with runes of the first men. The man was so engrossed in what he was doing that he failed to realize that the queen was standing in the doorway. Grand Maester, Margaery said gently, not wanting to frighten the man. Huh? Sam said, looking up from the book. What? It took a second before he realized who he was addressing. He promptly shut his book and scrambled to his feet, bowing his head. Sorry, Your Grace, he said, going red in the cheeks. Margaery smiled and closed the door behind her. It's all right, Sam. Are those the books John sent you? She asked, walking over to his desk. Sam nodded and took his seat, as Margaery sat across from him. I was hoping that I could find anything else that could be helpful, but I found nothing. What exactly were you hoping to find? Margaery asked curiously. Sam leaned back in his chair. I've read everything I could get my hands on about Whites and the others. They don't seem to have any sort of strategy. They win by slamming down like a wave on whoever they're attacking. They're almost like the Unsullied. They show no fear. They show no emotion. They just keep coming after the living until they're destroyed. Go on, Margaery said. Even though I am not my father, some of his lessons have stayed with me. I realized that to minimize loss and keep morale high, the leaders of the first men were going to have to fight a defensive battle, Sam explained. I was hoping that they had built a structure before the wall that helped them win the war. I would be surprised if they built anything during the war, Margaery said with a slight shrug. As would I, but I owed it to the king and others to check again, Sam said, slamming the book shut in frustration. Margaery noticed a silver direwolf head embossed on the cover of the book. The same wolf head that flew from the Stark banners. She leaned forward and grabbed the book, flipping through the pages. Is this Brun the Builder's biography? Sam nodded. That's his. I also have Lancel the Clever, the Grey King, Garth Greenhand, and Durin Godsgrief. I assume they knew each other. Sam nodded. It's a very good story, if not for the living dead and whatnot. Bran Stark rallied the clans in the north and brought them south after giants began to flee south and whites started attacking villages. He started. The other 4 men wrote about having an interaction with one of the old gods, claiming that it was the gods that drove them to rally the clans to fight back against the rising darkness. Did Bran Stark not have one of these interactions? Margaery curiously. Sam shook his head. He did, but it happened as he was crossing the neck. The goddess, as he described her, told him to head south to the Isle of Faces, where Lan Durin and all the others had assembled as well. So the old gods played a role in the long night. It looks like it, Sam sighed. The rest is history. The first men rallied and drove back the others. The wall was built, and the 5 men went on to become legends. Margaery nodded, looking at the other 4 books on Sam's desk. It wasn't hard to tell which book belonged to who. Gartz's had a rose, Lance a lion. Durin a stag, and the Grey King had a trident. A question suddenly popped into Margaery's head. The old gods appeared to all 5 men. Sam nodded. Yes. Even the Grey King. Sam snapped his fingers, understanding where the queen was going with her questions. His eyes lit up as he got to talk about one of his favorite subjects, books. That's a very interesting story, Your Grace, he said. The Grey King was a devout follower of the drowned god, but during his meeting with the old gods, he saw what the drowned god truly was. I believed he described him as the very expression of death and madness. Sounds about right, Margaery said, repressing a shudder as she pushed away thoughts of Euron Greyjoy. During the final battle against the others, the Grey King was nearly killed before the drowned god intervened and saved his life. Sam continued. For that, the drowned god made the Grey King swear to follow only the drowned god, and to lead his subjects in the same direction. The man himself would never sail on the Yig again, but it didn't take long for his men to become the Ironborn, as we know them now. Why did the other clans not do anything? Margaery asked. They fought side by side with the man. Sam shook his head. I'm not sure why, Your Grace. By my guess, they simply didn't have the time. Bryn the Builder was busy building the wall Storm's End, and he was also rumored to have helped with the High Tower. House Stark and House Bolton also went to war again. The Riverlands and the Reach became embroiled in power struggles. Dorne as well. The Vale and the Stormlands had their problems, but they were on the eastern side of Westeros, and as such, never had to deal with the raids. Margaery crossed her legs and patted her lap thoughtfully. Do you think, if the drowned god intervened then, do you think he'll intervene now? Sam frowned and looked thoughtful. After a moment, he merely shrugged. I'm honestly not sure, Your Grace. Margaery mused, her mind flashing back to the attack on her and her son. If the drowned god had been able to do that, she feared for Robb's safety. Your Grace, Sam asked. Do you think he'll go after Robb? Margaery asked, putting the question out in the open. I don't know, Sam admitted. Do you? He came after me, Margaery answered quietly. What's to stop him from going after my husband? He's surrounded by soldiers, Sam offered. As was I, Margaery countered. 2 of the best warriors in Westeros, and it still took another 3 warriors to bring down Euron Greyjoy. Sam spread his hands. I'll draft the message immediately, Your Grace, and send it at once. Thank you, Grand Maester, Margaery said, shifting in her seat. May I ask you something? Of course, Sam answered immediately. What exactly did you study at the Citadel? Margaery asked. Sam raised an eyebrow. Oh, is there a particular area of study you would like to know more about? I can send a message back to Old Town if I don't know the answer myself. Margaery gave the large man a kind smile. That's very kind of you, Master. I was wondering what you knew about, well, pregnancy. Eddard Stark. The Lord of Winterfell gazed over the map of the wall as Lord Commander Corran placed markers where each region would guard the wall. From the look of things, Robb was bringing more men than needed to man the castles. 34,000 men, 10,000 Vale men, Riverlanders, and Westermen, along with 2,000 Crownlanders and the King's Company, to go along with the 10,000 Northmen, 5,000 Ironborn, and countless wildlings. Mates and his free folk had control of Longbarrow, Hoarfrost Hill, and Woodswatch by the Pool. Woodswatch was led by Tormund, while the Magnar of the Fens had Hoarfrost Hill. The former wildling monarch had so many men that several wildlings were rebuilding other fortresses and even clearing the King's Road north for Robb and his men. The Northmen, under the command of himself, the Great John and Rickard Karstark, were repairing Sentinel Stand, Greyguard, and Icemark. Castle Black, Eastwatch, and the Shadow Tower remained in the hands of the Night's Watch, but their garrisons had been supported by the Ironborn, the clansmen of the Vale, and the Skagosi. Stone Door, Oakenshield, and Sable Hall had been set aside for Ned's good brother and the warriors of the Riverlands. Torches, Green Guard, and Queen's Gate were for Yon and the Valemen. The last 3 castles, Westwatch by the Sea, Deep Lake, and Reimgate, would be in the hands of the Westermen, led by Jaime Lannister. As it stood, each castle would be garrisoned by about 3,000 men. The castles under the joint command of the Night's Watch, Ironborn, and Tribesmen would have half that. But Ned hoped that the men of the Stormlands, the Reach, and Dorne would make up the numbers. What about the rest? Quisin asked, after he and his steward finished laying out where the first wave of men would live. The war will have started by the time they reach us, Ned answered. We will add men where they are needed. As of now, we'll plan to disperse the men of the Stormlands between Eastwatch, the Shadow Tower, and Castle Black. They will be our weak links among the wall. Qhorin's steward gestured weakly at the one castle which had been ignored during their entire conversation. It was the strongest castle that the Watch possessed, but it was also filled with the most horror stories in all of Westeros. Does the king truly want the Night Fort? Ned shrugged. The decision is out of my hands. Besides, we need every castle to be manned, and the king will do what he must. The steward bowed and left the room. When he was gone, Qhorin scowled and took a deep swig of his ale. Idiot, he muttered. Ned shrugged. It was a reasonable question. No, it wasn't. Qhorin shook his head. Can't question madness. Ned sighed internally. He was trying to avoid another debate with Qhorin about the matter. After Bran had informed Ned that it was time to man the wall, he had then stated that Robb must command the Night Fort. At the time, Ned had thought nothing of it. Bran said many things, and most of the time, they proved to be important. It was only after Ned's return to the wall was he reminded, several times, why the Night Fort had been abandoned and the darkness that haunted the place. Ned had, of course, raised these concerns to his son. Flashback. Ned and his son were alone in the shadow of the stables. It was night, and only a few sentries walking atop the wall were awake. Everyone else had swiftly found their beds and went to sleep. Their days were long and filled almost entirely with training, checking defenses and helping construct weapons of dragonglass. Robb and only Robb can command the Night Fort, Bran repeated. Ned huffed and crossed his arms, shaking his head. That's not a good enough answer, Bran. Bran frowned. Regardless of your beliefs, father, I do not have all the answers. I merely echo what I am told by the gods. The old gods usually make sense, Ned grunted. Or do you think what they say makes sense because it comes from them? Bran countered. Then explain what you think it means, Bran. Ned sighed. You have some connection to them. If Bran had the ability to move anything below his waist, he would have shifted uncomfortably. It was obvious that he had an idea of why Robb was being sent to the Night Fort, but he was scared to voice it. Despite what had happened to Robb and the large change that had taken over Bran, the young Greenseer still viewed the king as his brother. Evil attracts its own, Bran started. The Night Fort has its history, and the others will no doubt be drawn to it. That doesn't explain why Robb must be there, Ned said. Bran took a moment to collect his thoughts, before continuing. It was clear that he did not want to have this conversation, but Ned wanted an answer. The gods don't see people like you, or I do, Bran said finally. They see their souls. They see if they're good or evil. Robb's soul shines brighter than the others, because his goodness affects more. The great other, the Night King, his shines bright as well, but for the wrong reasons. Ned frowned, trying to comprehend what his son was saying. Then it all clicked. You're offering Robb up as a sacrifice, Ned growled. Not as a sacrifice, but as a champion, of sorts, Bran said, trying to sound reassuring. Only one with a soul like Robb's can hope to stand against the Night King. The young man shook his head. No, not stand against. Outlast. Robb's relentless desire to do good, to be good, is the only thing that can compare to the other's desire to see us all dead. What about Rhaegar's prophecy? Ned asked. I never said Robb would defeat the others. He serves as a beacon. So long as he lives, hope for humanity lives. Bran explained. Rhaegar's prophecy refers to the one who will end the darkness, once and for all. Who might that be? We both know exactly who that is. Father, Bran said, seeing through Ned's thinly veiled deception. Rhaegar was indeed the prince that was promised, born amidst salt and smoke. However, it is his final song, the song of ice and fire, his son, who will end the darkness. Ned ran a rough hand over his face. Gods help me. They did, Bran said with a hint of sarcasm. They gave you 2 sons who will save the world. Flashback. Drop the subject. Qhorin, Ned said, is there anything I must know before I ride back to Greyguard? Your brother has landed at Eastwatch. Qhorin replied, I will send him to you when he gives his report to me. He also reports seeing dragons. That will be Jon and Daenerys, Ned said. Have you prepared for them? As best we could. Qhorin grunted. I have my best builders at the Night Fort, as we speak. What of the walkways between castles? Ned asked. Atop the wall, there were walkways between all the castles. It was not only an efficient way of sending messages between garrisons, but it was also a good way to send reinforcements and supplies. We're still in the process of putting down gravel, but it's nearly complete, Kurin promised. Believe me, Lord Stark, we've pored through every book in Aimon's library. Whatever we can do to prepare, it's been noted, or is currently being worked on. Ned nodded. Of course, apologies. I will return when the king is close. Ned, ever since the rebellion, had always been the one in charge. He gave the orders and always wanted to make sure that everything was prepared. He needed to remind himself constantly that, although the Night's Watch worked with him, he was not in charge of them. They still had independence from Westeros. Thank you, Lord Stark, Colin said, sensing his awkwardness. Ride safely. The snow is thick. As Ned walked out of the solar, he heard Corin mutter behind him. Thank fuck for those shovelers. Captain Stark, Cata, Arya, and Rickon stood in the center of the courtyard, as dozens of heavily armored men rode in, armed to the teeth. For a moment, the Lady of Winterfell was transported back to the tourney at Harrenhal, when the giant ruins were decorated with dozens of banners and there seemed to be color everywhere. Now, many of those banners were entering Winterfell, runes and lions, fishes and eagles, a broken wheel, and a charging boar. There were no less than half a dozen houses present from all three regions. The first to dismount and reach her was her brother, a brilliant smile breaking through his snow-covered beard. Sister, he said happily, as the two siblings embraced. Edmure Cat sighed quietly. You're beginning to look like father. I finally decided to take his advice and grow up, her younger brother chuckled as he pulled back. He knelt in front of Arya, tilting his head as he looked at her. Arya scuffed her boot on the cobblestone. I know, I look like my Aunt Lyanna. Edmure's smile softened. No, you like Aerie, he said. You're just a little taller than I remember. He glanced down at the slim sword at her side before adding, and much more deadly. Arya beamed at her uncle, which made Cat's eyes water just a bit. Edmure, despite any flaws he may have, certainly knew how to talk to people. This must be Rickon, Edmure said as he moved on to Cat's youngest. Let me take a look at you, lad. You'll be a good-looking as a Tully and as tall and strong as a Stark. As Edmure finished up greeting Catsel's kids, another man whom she knew reasonably well approached her. She was not a small woman, but the bronze Ewan towered over her, looking fierce in his distinctive bronze armor. When the older man reached her, he bowed deeply. My lady, he said kindly. Thank you for your hospitality. We are always welcome to receive friends of House Stark, Cat said as she curtsied. It has been some time since Winterfell has been graced with your presence, my lord. Jan took a small moment to look around. I was heartbroken to hear about what those foul Boltons had done to your home. There hardly seems to be a scratch on it. The foundations were still strong, and there is still quite a bit of fight in these old walls, Cat said with a satisfied smile. There was much to replace and repair, but we certainly didn't have to start from scratch.
Jan nodded. I am glad to it, my lady. Have you heard any news from your husband?
He asks that you report to Corin Halfhand at Castle Black. He will direct you to the castles you will defend. Cat answered. 9 castles have been set aside, 3 for each army. They should be in working order by the time you arrive. Thank the gods for that, Edmure said, joining the conversation. Cat gestured towards the great hall. Please, my lord, brother, let us sit and eat. I've had the kitchens prepare a hearty stew and fresh bread for your arrival, and I'm sure it's been a long, cold ride. A grim smile touched Jan's weathered features. A stew and bread sound perfect, my lady. The gods know we need to warm our frozen bones. As the two men strode towards the hall, Cat was about to follow them when she felt someone tug on her sleeve. She looked down and was surprised to see Arya by her side, but her daughter wasn't looking at her. Arya's glare had been turned on a man who was across the courtyard, stabling his horse as he spoke with a rangy, copper-haired man who bore the burning tree of House Marbrand. Why is he here? Arya practically spat. I don't know, Cat said, feeling her anger boiling in her stomach. Don't go around causing trouble. Arya, Robb wouldn't have allowed him to ride north if he did not trust him to behave himself. He should be dead for what he did, Arya growled. Captain couldn't help but agree. Although she felt slightly shameful for wrongly accusing and arresting Tyrion Lannister for the part she thought he played in the attempted assassination on Bran, her anger had been turned on Jaime Lannister when she had found out that it had been the knight, not his brother, who had pushed her son from the tower. "Leave it be, Arya," Cat ordered, trying to convince herself as well as her daughter. "He will be gone from here in the morning. We will deal with his presence for a single night." "As you say, mother," Arya said seriously before stalking off. Line break. Cat exited the keep, taking a deep breath of the cold air as she wrapped her thick cloak around her. It was impossible to be outside for more than a few minutes without being dressed from head to toe in furs. But Cat wasn't planning on staying out long. She just needed to step away from her great hall, which had been turned into a war room. Strangely enough, she was not alone outside. Standing on the other side of the courtyard, looking up at the broken tower, was Jaime Lannister. He looked to be alone, which Cat found odd since Sir Adam Marbrand, the copper-haired man, seemed to shadow his every step. "So Shaima," Cat called, her curiosity getting the better of her, as she crossed the courtyard. The former knight turned around, just as surprised to see Cat as she was to see him.
"Just Jaime now, my lady," he replied with a tone that stunned Cat. It was calm, humble, and apologetic. He bowed his head and began to walk away. "I'll take my leave."
"Why are you here?" Jaime stopped and turned to face her. "Here as in Winterfell, or here as in—" His words trailed off, as he gestured to the tower. "The tower." Jaime looked up at the tower. "This is where it all began, didn't it? What happened, everything that happened, it started here." Cat shook her head. "Your sister started it when she murdered Jon Arryn." So much had been cleared up for Cat after the war. Cersei had killed Jon Arryn because he had gotten too close to discovering the truth about Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen. Lysa, under Pettitor's instruction, had sent a letter to Cat and Ned telling them that the Lannisters were plotting something. Then there was the matter of the attempted assassination, which Pettitor had duped Cat into believing Tyrion Lannister had been responsible for, causing Cat to kidnap the imp and start a war between the Westerlands and Riverlands. If Cat had been smarter or less trusting of those she thought her friends, then perhaps things would have worked out very differently. Jaime glanced at her before nodding. "I stand corrected." "What are you doing out here then?" "While Cersei may have started everything, this is where things started for me," Jaime answered, amending his previous statement. "Who knows what might have happened if you hadn't had thrown my son from the tower because he caught you with your sister," Cat asked bluntly. Jaime smiled slightly. "You've certainly developed some stark bluntness after so many years up here, my lady. It seems you haven't gotten rid of that vile humor of yours, Kingslayer," Cat shot back. Jaime's smile wavered before it disappeared. "I am sorry for what I did, my lady. Truly. I was a different man back then. A lesser man." Cat resisted the urge to scoff. "Has a year truly changed who you are at your core, Jaime?" The ex-knight merely shrugged. "If I hadn't, why would I be here?" he asked, before walking off. Robb Stark. Robb squatted down, running his hands through the cold waters of the God's Eye, his mind lost to the past. He had felt the presence of the old gods when he had been on the Isle of Faces, just before he met the Green Men for the first time. However, the last time he interacted with them, he had been in this very spot. He had heard the voices of his aunt and uncle, telling him that they were proud of him as well as something else. "Make sure you know when to end it." Those had been his Aunt Lyanna's words. And looking back now, Robb could see what she meant. Robb had tried to find a peaceful resolution so that he wasn't dragged into another war with the Targaryens. However, after the attempt on his life, he knew that he had to draw a line in the sand. She wasn't just speaking about the war, but peace as well. "A little late for a late-night walk, isn't it?" the Green Man joked, as he joined Robb on the beach. Like the Battle of the God's Eye, the man wore an iron breastplate over boiled leathers and wool clothes. An axe of chipped dragon glass was slung through a leather loop by his side. "Just taking in the view," Robb replied, shaking the water from his hands as he rose to his feet. "Do the old gods intervene in human history very much?" "What do you mean?" Robb made a vague gesture. "During the War of the Five Kings, I encountered the old gods 3 times. The first was after I was nearly killed by a shadow demon sent after me by Stannis Baratheon. Eddard Stark, the king who knelt, spoke to me in a dream. When my army was preparing to face Tywin at High Heart, I went to pray before a heart tree. My uncle Brandon and my aunt Lyanna spoke to me. They gave me advice. After they spoke to me again here, in this very place. The green men nodded slowly. The green men are sometimes told prophecies of what will happen. We were once told that the black dragon will be slain by a raven, and that his last descendant would be known as the monster to all who see him. You're talking about the Blackfire rebellions, Robb said. Daemon Blackfire was the first to switch the Targaryen sigil, making his a black dragon of a field of red. He was said to have been killed by his half-brother Brynden Rivers. Bloodraven, his last of his line, Maelys the Monstrous, was slain by Sarah Barristan during the War of the Ninepenny Kings. We were also told about the alliance of creatures that would topple the Red Dragon, the Green Men said. Robb smiled slightly. You wouldn't happen to be talking about a direwolf, a stag, a falcon, and a fish, would you? The Green Man shrugged. Some prophecies were easier to understand than others. We certainly didn't see the rise of Daemon Blackfire, but we always knew that the Targaryen dynasty would be toppled. We just never knew when. One of my predecessors thought that it would happen during the Targaryen Civil War. So do the old gods speak often, or... After the Andal invasion, their influence and power dwindled, the Green Man explained. They passed their knowledge on to the Green Men, but they haven't spoken directly to men since the Age of Heroes. They have, however, occasionally influenced the thoughts of men who still have the blood of the first men running through their veins. House Stark has always been one of their favorites. What do you mean? Robb asked. Why do you think House Stark has survived for so long? The Green Man asked. House Martell was founded by an Andal adventurer who rose to true power when Nymeria landed. House Baratheon grew from the loins of Arys Baratheon, the bastard brother of Aegon the Conqueror, and Argella Durrandon. House Tyrell arrived in Westeros as an Andal knight and they eventually married into House Gardner, but only through a female line. House Tyrell didn't rise to power until after the Andal invasion, and even then they only gained true command of the Riverlands after the Conqueror landed and destroyed Heir the Black with his dragons. The Arryns descend from Andalos itself and have very few drops of First Men blood in their veins. The Lannisters are the only house that can compete with the Starks, but Landa Casterly allowed his original family name to fade as House Lannister took over, and the Lannisters have forgotten what gods their founder respected and prayed to. Only House Stark has kept to its roots as First Men, even repelling the advancements of the Andals. They have always been looked after by the gods. Robb frowned. Torrhen had a direwolf with him when he appeared in my dream. I'm guessing that has something to do with all this. The Green Man nodded. The direwolves were given to the Starks of Winterfell as a symbol of their relationship to the old gods. Redwyne was the first, named after the leader of the children, who gave her life to help defeat the leader of the others. Bane was the last. He was Torrhen's companion, Robb said. He said that when direwolves once again stood by the side of the Starks, we would take back our crown. Indeed, the Green Man said. We've spoken about many things, Your Grace, but I do not believe that I've answered your question. Yes, the old gods have spoken to humans before, but it has been a very long time since they have done so. Now they use their weakened influence whenever it seems right. Do you think they have intervened very much in this war? Robb asked. He was surprised when the Green Man let out a hearty laugh. Robb Stark, they have intervened more than you can imagine, he said as his laughs receded. They charged the Order of the Green Men to awaken the deep forests and seek out the children of the forest when the second long night came again, but that was centuries ago. More recently, they helped your brother Bran through the mentorship of Bloodraven to realize his true potential and powers. Robb raised an eyebrow. They must have been very active then. They've poked and prodded people in the right direction is all, the Green Man said. Besides, why else would Roose Bolton have betrayed you? You have the might of 4 realms under your banner. The man shook his head. No, the old gods needed an event that would send Bran Stark heading north. The burning of Winterfell was the push he needed. Robb frowned. I thought the old gods looked favorably on my house. Now you tell me that they were responsible for my mother being captured and my home burned to a crisp. Yes, but did they allow your mother to be killed by the Boltons? What about your father being rescued by the Company of the Rose? Do you think Torrhen Stark just came up with the idea for a backup plan in case the Targaryens torched the north from the neck to the wall? The Green Man asked. The old gods have always and will always look out for House Stark. Then explain Robert's rebellion, Robb demanded. You would not be alive if Ned Stark had not married Catelyn Tully, the Green Man answered seriously. I will correct myself. The old gods have always looked out for House Stark, but their work is not always nice. They convinced Rhaegar to go after Lyanna, helping him realize that Jon would help in the long night, although he was never given that much information. Robb's head spun. I need time alone. The Green Man nodded. Of course. Forgive me. As I said when we first met, I am not so good with explaining things. He apologized. I will leave you with this, my king. The old gods have always done what they thought was best for House Stark. No matter what has happened, think about where you are now. Your father and mother still rule the north from Winterfell. Sansa may one day be the Lady of the Vale. Jon has come to terms with both sides of his family. And you, your grace, have a wife, a child, and a crown. Without another word, the Green Man turned on his heel and walked away, leaving Robb alone to contemplate his new view of the old gods, and pondering what else they had planned for his family. Asha Greyjoy. The wall was bloody cold. Asha shivered as she stood a little closer to the fire, listening as her uncle spoke with the Lord Commander, a tall, gray-haired man who was missing quite a few fingers. Asha was surprised the first time she saw him. She was expecting a big-boned drunk with a wild beard and more holes in his belt than brains in his head. She wasn't sure where she had come up with the image, but her father had never cared for the watch, and so she never cared about it either. Warren Halfhand certainly proved her wrong. He was like Uncle, quiet and deliberate. The wall itself had also surprised Asha. Just as she had never cared for the Night's Watch, she had never cared for the wall either. She, like many others, believed that it had been raised to keep the wildlings in their frozen hellhole, away from the Seven Kingdoms. When she finally saw it in person, she realized just how wrong she and so many others had been. Bran the Builder could have easily built a stone wall, complete with towers and fortresses, to keep out the wildlings. The Monument of Ice was meant to keep out something much more terrible than some fur-covered savages. She and 1,000 Ironborn had arrived at Castle Black a few days ago, and it didn't take long for Asha to develop some respect for the ancient order. To stay so long in the snow and ice, Asha couldn't imagine how miserable they all were day after day. Yet they still took up their spears and cloaks and stood at attention when it was their shift. Currently she, her uncle, and the Lord Commander stood around the roaring fire at the end of the mess hall, talking about the preparations for the war. Her uncle, his dragon-glass dagger up to the firelight, examining it. There was nothing beautiful or extraordinary about it. It was a piece of black rock with edges that had been chipped into the edges of a blade, and a hilt that had been wrapped with many layers of leather. It was about the length of a good-sized dagger, like the kind that was used by sailors to cut tar-crusted ropes. You'll have to get bloody close to use it. Uncle grunted. How many do we have? Ships arrive at Eastwatch every day carrying barrels of it. Halfhand replied, crossing his arms. We receive wagons of spears, daggers, and arrows every week. Harlaw tossed Asha the dagger. The Lady of Pike grabbed the weapon and was surprised by the lightness and balance of the weapon. She nodded slightly as she took a few practice swings. In the cold and snow, she definitely didn't want a heavy piece of steel or iron weighing her arm down. She felt like she could wield the dagger all day. If we have these, then you're expecting the whites to break through the wall, she said. Creighton shrugged. Better to be safe than sorry, he said. If the king's plan works, the whites may never break through our gates, but I have my doubts. The king's plan? Uncle asked. What do you mean? Corin spat into the fire. His brother has cooked up some idea that the others will go straight for him. Says that they'll want to snuff out his light or something. Uncle shrugged. However he phrased it, he has a point. The king is who we've rallied to. He's the one leading us. Think of what will happen if he's lost. Corin nodded. Fair. Anyways, if we can keep the whites on the other side of the wall for long enough, perhaps the king can figure out a way to defeat the others.
If they're destroyed, so are the whites then,
Asha guessed. Makes our job easier, don't it? The fight may be a little easier, lass. But I've seen you shivering ever since you got here. This ain't nothing. It'll get much colder once they eat. Others arrive. Halfhand said grimly. The elements will be just as deadly as the fucking undead.
Do you have any advice I should pass on to my men?
Uncle asked. Protect your ears and nose, or else you might lose 'em, the half-hand said. And forget about wearing any fancy plate armor. Ringmail and leather are what's best up here.
Thank you, Lord Commander, Uncle said.
Don't thank me yet. Half-hand grunted as the sounds of a fight echoed through the walls. The men of the Iron Islands were a stubborn lot, but so were hundreds of tribesmen from the Vale, who had been assigned to Castle Black. When the two groups weren't passing a pitcher of ale between them, they were brawling. "It sounds like you're needed, my lord." Uncle huffed as he strode out of the room. Aisha smiled slightly when she heard him mutter, "If the cold doesn't kill them, then their idiocy will." "Have you met the king?" the Lord Commander asked, when Uncle had left the room. Asha raised an eyebrow before shaking her head. "No, never had the honor," she said sarcastically. "His long-lost uncle, or whoever captured Deepwood Modded from my men and I, Robb Stark, was done south with the Targaryens." "Why do you ask?" "Just curious," Kareen grunted. "I've never met him either, but if he's anything like his father, then we're in good hands." The older man glanced at her. "Luckily for you, you'll have a chance to meet both father and son." Asha gave him a thin smile before quickly looking back at the fire. She knew what happened the last time a Stark had encountered a Greyjoy. Her brother had been killed by Lord Stark after he had been discovered in the bowels of the Dreadfort, but that had been a mercy killing. The Terran had been mutilated by the bastard of Bolton, and Lord Stark had been right to put him out of his misery. Before that, it was during her father's failed rebellion, when Ned Stark and Robert Baratheon had knocked down the walls of Pike and took her father's crown. For a brief moment, Asha wondered what they would do when they met her. Robb Stark. Winter had truly come. Snow was piled high on either side of the road, standing higher than most children, and still, it continued to fall. Thankfully, Robb's father's idea of sending men with shovels along the King's Road had proven to be a massive success. The armies of the Westerlands, the Vale and the Riverlands had all reached the wall in good time. It had taken almost a month and a half, but it would have taken more than twice that long if the snow hadn't been cleared from the road. Robb, at the head of a long column of mounted men, couldn't help but feel a certain sense of satisfaction. Garbed in steel and leather, with a thick fur cloak, leading soldiers, he was back in his element. He knew war. He knew what was needed of him. It was simpler than ruling. "You look much happier since we've crossed the neck," Sarobar commented as they rode. 5 of Robb's Kingsguard surrounded him. Brienne, Robbar, Balon, Roland, and Garth had all accompanied him north. Although Loras was by far the second best swordsman of the group, just below Brienne, Robb had left him behind with perhaps Robb's weakest knight, Ser Haber, to guard his family. The 5 warriors were armored, similar to how Robbar, Garth, and Brienne were the last time Robb visited the north. They still wore their unique white armor, but each had a thick fur cloak that had been colored white in lieu of their standard white cape. Their helms hung from their saddles. It was too cold for anyone to be wearing metal on their heads. A hood was much better. "I believe I should be," Robb said, spreading his hands to the snowy land around them. "This is my home. This is always where I was meant to be." "Do you hate King's Landing?" Sarobalan asked curiously. "I have become more tolerant of the city, mainly due to my wife's projects, but the North will always be my original home." Robb explained. "Its beauty lies in its simplicity." "A poet as well as a king," Sargarth laughed. Robb smiled. "The truth often sounds poetic, even if it's brutal." The 4 knights laughed, even with Brienne cracking a smile. Robb was happy to see his companions in high spirits. Ever since they had marched out, all anyone had spoken about was what was waiting for them at the wall. Whites and others, undead giants, and monstrous ice spiders. Men were recalling stories they had been told as children, and with every story told, a new evil was added. Robb had done his best to keep the mood at a tolerable level. He couldn't have his men running off before the fighting began. Robb slowly brought his horse to a stop as he and his Kingsguard reached the top of a slight hill. Before them was Winterfell, in all its rebuilt glory. The walls looked as tall and as strong as they were in Robb's childhood. The towers looked no different. Even the broken tower was still, well, broken. Near the center of the great castle, Robb could make out treetops, along with a single red tree surrounded by green. The godswood. "Winterfell?" Robb breathed as his protectors came to a stop next to him. "Welcome to the ancestral seat of House Stark, rulers of the North." "A great sight, my lord," Sarian Robber praised. "It is," Robb said, urging his mount forward. They would spend the night in Winterfell before continuing northward. It was also a chance for Robb to see his family. Line break. Robb had flashbacks to the last time a king rode into Winterfell. It was not a pleasant memory. It had been darkened by the terrible events that had happened because of it. The death, the destruction, all and more had happened because Robert fucking Baratheon had decided that Robb's father, the honorable and straightforward Ned Stark, had to be his next hand. There was a reason Robb had chosen Tyrion Lannister to be his hand. Robb had no shortage of friends whom he knew would be forever loyal to him. Small Joe Number, Garland Tyrell, Harold Arryn, to name a few, people he trusted, more than the stunted son of Tyrone Lannister. However, none possessed the intellectual and political capabilities that Tyrion had. With positions of Master of Law or Master of Ships, the Ned Starks of the world could fill those roles. But the hand of the king had to be just as politically astute as the king, if not more so. Bloodraven, a past hand of the king, had proven such. Robb pushed the dark thoughts from his head as he dismounted. It took only a few steps before he threw his arms around his mother, nearly lifting her off the ground. He could feel her digging her face into his cloak, blinking away her tears. "Hello, mother," Robb murmured, pulling away. "I'm home." Robb's mother quickly wiped away her tears. "Robb," she sniffled. The king helped wipe away a stray tear from his mother's face, before dropping to a knee before his sister, who had the opposite reaction as their mother. Arya was nearly shaking with excitement. Just as when they had been reunited in Robb's tent outside King's Landing, Arya still wore boy's clothes and carried her sword. Needle. She was still small and lean, but when Robb placed his hands on her shoulders, he could feel muscles there. "What has happened to my sister Arya?" Robb asked jokingly. "All I see is a Bravo Sea water dancer." "Why can't I be both?" Arya responded. Robb laughed as Arya threw her arms around him, hugging his neck tightly. After her, Robb turned to Rickon, who puffed out his chest and tried to look older than he was. Robb grinned and ruffled his hair before hugging him as well. When he pulled back, he saw the small wooden sword that the boy tried, and failed to hide behind his back. "You have begun your training then," Robb said, glancing at where Septon Mikkel was. The Valeman gave the king a slight nod, confirming his statement. Robb ruffled his brother's head again. "You and your sister better protect our home," he said, looking at Arya as well. The young woman had lost her smile and looked incredibly serious now. "We will, Robb. Promise." Robb got back on his feet, dusting off snow from the wet spot on his knee. "You both are the Stark in Winterfell, and I know that you will protect our home and our people." The young king felt a light slap on his arm. His mother was smiling, despite the tears in her eyes.
"They're children, Robb," she scolded lightly. "We're fine here, Sir Michael has been wonderful."
"I expect nothing less from the man," Robb said, nodding to the Valeman. "Sir Mintel, may I have a moment of your time?" The young knight bowed. "Of course, your grace," as his siblings ran off and his mother took charge of finding her new guest rooms for the night. Robb, Brienne, Sir Obar, and Sir Mitchell made their way to the Lord Solar. The two Valemen took the moment to catch up. They had known each other in their boyhoods. Not only were their fathers close, but so were Runstone and the Red Fort. Their homes. "Do you speak often with your brother?" Robber asked curiously. "He and I had a good long talk when he and the men of the Vale passed through a month ago," Sir Mitchell replied. "His wife regularly sends me messages, keeping me abreast in the going-ons of my home." "Do you miss it at all?" Sir Michael shrugged. "Occasionally, but I have my Ysilla and Lord and Lady Stark have been very gracious to me." The Valeman gave his countryman a wry smile. "I've even grown fond of the cold." "That fondness will be tested soon," Robb grunted, looking over his shoulder. "This is nothing yet." When the group reached the office, Sir Obar took up his position outside the room as Brienne and Sarah Michael followed the king inside. When the door was closed, Robb spoke first. "How many men have my father left here?" Robb asked. 200, sire." Sir Michael replied instantly. "We have enough rations to last 2 years. That's including food for those in the town and the farms beyond." "That is good to hear," Robb said. "If the wall falls, then Winterfell will be our next line of defense." "What about the northern castles?" Sir Michael asked. "The Last Hearth, Carhold, Bear Island, what will happen to them?" "We still have a little time to prepare. If the wall is breached, the people of the north, the entire north, need to be prepared to take only what they need, and run like hell south," Robb explained. "God's willing that won't happen, but Winterfell needs to be our next line of defense." As Robb spoke, he began to look through the scrolls that were piled on the bookshelf. He finally found the one he needed. and began to unroll it across the desk, as Sir Michael responded to him. "We'll need to prepare the castle then." Robb looked up and smiled grimly. "Not yet, but it's better to know what needs to be done now rather than later," he said as he finished unrolling a map of the castle. "Now," Robb continued, "let's see how well you think with your head instead of your sword arm." Bryn Highsmith. Just as when the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, a green man will always find himself a heart tree. That had been the phrase Bryn's predecessor had preached to him before his passing. It was a phrase that Bryn had found to always be eerily true. Wherever he found himself, he always managed to find himself a weirwood or a heart tree to kneel before and pray. When the green man had entered the Winterfell, he simply allowed his feet to take him to where he needed to be. The king had gone off with Sir Michael, no doubt to talk about the defenses of the castle, and his lady mother had quickly taken charge of her household. Bryn had silently slipped off to the heavily wooded region. Now he knelt before the black pool, bowing his head. He could sense everything around him. He felt the wind blowing in from the north, turning his nose red with its chill. He could hear every creak from the branches above as they dealt with the increasing weight of snow on their boughs. He could hear the chittering of squirrels as they burrowed into tree trunks to escape the cold. He was slowly becoming a part of nature. "Hello, Bryn Highsmith," a soft, sweet, female voice said. Bryn slowly opened his eyes and looked up, finding an abnormally tall woman before him. She wore a long black cloak that covered every part of her body, including her feet. Even the majority of her face was concealed by the hood and shadows. All Bryn could see was her chin and mouth. Her skin was as pale and white as milk, and her lips, full and luscious, were upturned into an amused smile. However, that was not the strangest part about her. No, that honor belonged to the fact that she was standing in the center of the pool. My lady?" Bryn said curiously, bowing his head. He had no idea how to address a goddess. He could feel her power radiating. The woman's smile grew slightly. "Stand, Bryn," she commanded. "There is no need to call me a lady. I am hardly such." Bryn got to his feet, folding his hands behind his back. Yes. Do you know why I am here, Bryn?" "I'm not sure how you managed to manifest your form on this plane of existence," Bryn admitted honestly. "You can thank the Wolf King and his uncle for that," the goddess replied casually. "Belief in us has grown quite a bit since the boy has taken the throne. When news of the White spread, our names traveled with it. I am happy to hear that, but that doesn't explain why you are here." Bryn said, "The gods haven't shown themselves to mortals since the last long night, yes," the woman said, finishing his sentence. "During that time, we could appear more freely throughout this land. We lost such an ability with the coming of the Andals. As for why I am here, I have come to see if you are truly prepared for what you must do." Bryn hesitated before nodding. "I am." The green man didn't need to see the woman's face to know that she had raised one eyebrow. "You hesitate?" "Any man would," Bryn said, defending himself. "You are not any man, Bryn Highsmith," the goddess countered. "The green man has always been granted a sacred position by the mouths of the gods. With such a position comes even greater responsibility." "I know," Bryn sighed. Did my ancestor feel this way as well?" The goddess gave him a sympathetic smile. He worried about leaving his family behind. Yes, but he did not run from his fate when it came for him. He embraced it and did as he was tasked. Bryn nodded choppily. "I am not leaving a family behind, thankfully." "No, but life is not something many choose to leave behind willingly," she said gently. "There have been 2 times since the birth of this world that we have tasked another with its salvation. The first was the founder of your house. The second is you. We do not give out such missions lightly, nor do we hand them to those who are too weak to see them completed." A stronger gust of wind blew through the forest, but this time it came from the west. The goddess looked that way and nodded. "My time has come to end with you," she said. "We have seen you grow and prepare for the role you will play in the war. Bryn, and the gods favor you for it." Like a pig who was fattened before slaughter, Bryn grunted with grim sarcasm. "I'm honored." The goddess smiled as her form began to shimmer and disappear. "You remind me of Brynden, your ancestor," she said kindly. "You will understand before the end." Just like that, the goddess was gone, leaving Bryn alone in the godswood once again. He sighed and knelt before the heart tree. "Give me strength," he prayed. resuming his meditation. Robb Stark. Robb sat back on the bench, staring at his brother. Currently it was just he, his father and Bran alone in the mess hall of Castle Black. The Northern King and the majority of his Kingsguard had finished the journey to Castle Black, while Brienne had taken the men of the Crown Lands to the Night Fort, where the King's company were hard at work, helping finish the repairs. Robb hated parting with his commander. He had come to always expect Brienne to be by his side, protecting his back, but he also knew that Brienne was the least superstitious of the group and would be the best person for keeping the men in line as they settled down in the Night Fort, a place that was riddled with ghost stories. Repeat that. I think I misunderstood. Robb asked. You want to use me as bait? Father gave Bran an I told you so look, but the younger man ignored it as he kept his gaze on Robb. You're not bait, Bran sighed. You're a beacon.
I'm a worm on a lure.
Robb corrected. Let's stick to the truth. Bran rolled his eyes at his brother's metaphor. Robb, you are what holds this army together. So I'm the glue now. If that's the way you see it, Bran said, trying to reason with Robb. Whatever you wish to call yourself is irrelevant. You are the linchpin of our entire defense, and the enemy knows this. They will try to cut the head off the snake. Phenomenal, Robb muttered, running a hand through his hair. He looked at his father. You approved of this, father? Robb, I understand how you feel. I was similarly angered, but he made a convincing argument, father explained. You are the light that rivals the darkness of the others. They will try to snuff you out. They're scared of you, Robb. Robb raised his eyebrow and looked at Bran, who was reluctantly nodding. That's nice, I think, Robb said uncertainly. Robb, you're a manifestation of hope. Bran continued, the others want to extinguish all hope, and they will start with you. This works in our favor, father said, leaning forward. If the others want to cut the head off the snake, then we can do the same to them. Robb nodded, seeing the reasoning. If the others want him dead, then they'll send their best warriors after him, including their leader. If Robb could surround himself with the best he had, he could end the war before it ever really begins. Who's their leader again? Robb asked. A being called the Night King, Bran answered. He's the last of the original others created before the Age of Heroes. He's the one who has infected all of Crester's sons. Crester's sons? Robb asked. Long story, Bran replied, waving aside the question. The Night King's power flows through the other White Walkers, and such, the entire undead army. If he's gone, then so is the entire enemy army, Robb said, nodding. You should have started with that. Bran raised an eyebrow. I would have gotten there sooner if you hadn't kept interrupting. Robb snorted. Point taken. Robb, there's also a problem with the Night Fort, his father said grimly. The Northern King shook his head. Of course there is, he said ruefully. What's wrong, besides the fact that it is infested with horror stories? The stories are the problem, Robb, father sighed. Just as the others will be attracted to you because you radiate hope, they will also be drawn to the Night Fort because it radiates evil, I take it, Robb said, finishing the sentence. Is that why I was assigned there? You cancel out the darkness, Bran said simply. Robb crossed his arms. Well, all this sounds just great. Robb, if there was any other way we could do this, we would, but we can save the most lives this way, father said. Hey, I know, Robb nodded. I ride for the Night Fort in the morning. I'll give you a list of names. Can you ensure that they're sent to the Night Fort? I can use the donkey system. It'll be quicker, father replied, nodding. Who do you need? Robb took a small moment to collect his thoughts before answering. He knew many people who would love to have by his side in a fight, but given his current predicament, he needed certain individuals.
Yourself, Rangiel Towerley.
Lionel Corbray, Jon, Brienne, and anyone who wields a Valyrian steel weapon, Robb started. Alysanne Mormont carries Longclaw, her uncle's Valyrian sword, father suggested. I believe Sir Harris, Lord Harrowlaw's nephew, carries a Valyrian steel weapon as well. Him as well, Robb replied. What about Edric Dane? Bran offered. He wields Dawn. He does, father said, shocked. Robb looked at his father curiously. He knew that he fought Sir Arthur Dane at the Tower of Joy, but his father looked pale when Bran mentioned the famous white sword. The young king marked it down as something to talk to his father about later. The blade is no stranger to the others, Bran said. The Green Man has already charged Edric Dane with carrying it into battle. He's in the south, Robb said before nodding. We will need to get a message to him, and others. Like who? Father asked. I need Oberyn Martell, Gendry Baratheon, and that ancient axe he carries, Garland, Sarah Baelor, and their best warriors, Robb said. As for those who are already here, I need Jaime Lannister and all of our best warriors from the north, the Riverlands, the Westerlands, and the Vale, any that can be spared. Don't forget about the wildlings, Father said. If you need every man you can get, then you need to use all your options. If man says warriors he can spare, I'll gladly take them, Robb answered. Robb knew that he would be stripping many of the castles of their best commanders and warriors, but he refused to face the best the enemy could field without having the best of his own by his side. I will also need Daenerys Targaryen and her dragons, Robb added. Father nodded. She and Jon will return tonight. They've been scouting beyond the wall for days now. Have we sent any other scouts? Robb asked. The skin changers among the wildlings have dispersed themselves along the wall, Father explained. Their abilities have helped us keep watch for the enemy. What about the giants? Robb asked. Didn't Mance bring them south? He did, Father answered. They've helped mainly with repairing the walls. We've also been using them to test the strength of the gates under the wall. The older man spread his hands wide. We receive bushels of arrows and weapons of dragon glass daily. For hours the men train and prepare. Daenerys brought 500 unsullied soldiers north, and they have been training our men to fight like them. We're ready to fight now, and that's because of you. Being ready to fight and fighting are two different things, Father. Robb countered, but I see your point. You've done all you can, for now, Robb, Bran said impassively. Have I? I hear the whispers of the old gods, Robb, Bran said with the ghost of a smile. Trust me, you have. Robb couldn't help but grin. You have me there. Line break. Robb found his father atop the wall later that night. He was wrapped in his cloak and staring out over the lands beyond the wall, which looked to be nothing but a land covered with snow and shadow. There were no signs of any other color. His father seemed to sense Robb's presence. You should be asleep, he said. You have a long ride in the morning. I'll sleep soon, Robb promised, coming to stand beside his father. Ser Robber kept a respectful distance so that the father and son could speak in privacy. Have you noticed how Asha Greyjoy keeps her distance? Father asked, trying to avoid the topic Robb wanted to talk about. I've spoken with her uncle about it, Robb grunted softly. She's fine, just knows her place. And the Seagosi? I've spoken with them, and the hill tribes of the Vale, Robb said, cutting off the other topic he knew that his father wanted to go into. What's your history with Dawn? When Bran mentioned it in the mess hall, you looked as if you had seen a ghost. Father sighed and seemed to age 10 years. Stress from years ago reappeared as his eyes took on a far-off look. After the battle at the tower, I returned the sword to Starfall, Father explained. That was the last time I ever saw it again. But, Robb prompted. Father shook his head. That blade holds many bad memories for me, Robb. I can't think of it without smelling the blood and the roses, without remembering the faint life in my sister's dying hand when she asked me to name her son. His head dipped until his chin touched his chest. Ashara Dane was the only other woman I have ever loved, and she threw herself from the tallest tower in Starfall when I delivered the news of her brother's death. Robb laid a hand on his father's shoulder. He sympathized with the older man. Like Robb, he had entered manhood surrounded by death and war. He had lost 2 of his siblings, his father and countless friends in that fateful year, and he had barely been 20 years of age when he had been forced to face off against one of the deadliest swordsmen of the century. I am sorry, Father, Robb said quietly. Father shook his head again and looked at his son. It's all right, Robb, he replied. I don't have many good memories from that time in my life. There is nothing I can do about that, but shoulder them and move on. Father and son shared a long embrace before Robb eventually pulled back. The young king shivered and pulled his cloak tighter around his shoulder, burying his hands in the heavy fabric. I'll see you at the Night Fort in a few days, Robb said. I'll be there, Father replied. Robb nodded and began to head back towards the lift when a call from his father stopped him. Robb. The king of Westeros looked back over his shoulder. His father was smiling and had a proud look in his eye. Thank you, son. Marguerite Stark. Marguerite laid still on her bed as Sam and his fellow maester, Amos, poked and prodded her stomach. Amos was the Archmeister of Healing, as shown by the large silver ring he wore on his right hand. He was an older man, easily thrice the age of Sam, who was a little older than 20. His head was bald with a few stray wisps of white hair, his face was heavy and full of age lines, and his eyes were usually squinting, probably a product of years reading books combined with the effects of age. However, the man was remarkably kind and gentle as well as sharp. Age might have wilted his body, but the same could not be said for his mind. After an hour of Amos working and Sam taking notes, the older man straightened up and grabbed his walking staff, leaning on it. "You were right to seek guidance, Your Grace," Amos said, nodding slowly as he spoke. "I am pleased to say that you are indeed with child." Margaery's grandmother, who was sitting on the other side of the bed, leaned forward in her chair. "Archmaester, my granddaughter deals with quite a bit of stress. She is running a kingdom unassisted by her husband," she commented. "What would you recommend?" "Stress is usually not good for any pregnancy," Amos replied with the confidence of a man who knew what he was talking about. "I cannot order the queen to step away completely, but I would suggest that she lean more on her counsel and the Lord Hand in the coming months." "Grandmaster, would you summon Lord Tyrion?" Margus Tyrion the Grandva asked, although it came out more like an order rather than a request. Samuel bowed slightly before exiting the room. Archmaester, grandmother continued, "I assume that you will be staying here in the capital and assisting the queen through her pregnancy." Amos nodded. "I plan to, my lady. Meister Samuel is very bright, a rising star if there ever was one, but there is still much he must learn, and helping a lady through a pregnancy is a matter better learned through experience, rather than trial and error." The older man explained, "The queen is thankfully a very healthy young lady, but with such an important individual, a more experienced hand is often preferred." "As it is here," grandmother agreed. "If you need anything, please do not hesitate to ask." Amos bowed. "Thank you, my lady." The door opening stopped the conversation as Tyrion entered, followed by the Grand Maester. The hand looked as if he already knew what was happening, which wasn't a surprise to Margaery since the stunted lord had a knack for asking questions and a low tolerance when it came to waiting for answers. "My lady Archmaester," Tyrion said, addressing Amos and Lady Olenna before addressing the queen. "Your Grace, I believe congratulations are in order." Margaery smiled. "Thank you, Lord Tyrion." "Lord Tyrion, we have asked you here to inform you that the queen will slowly be detaching herself from ruling the realm." The Queen of Thorns explained, getting right to the point. "Archmaester Amos here says that stress is not good for a pregnant woman. I do not need to tell you that the crown comes with stress." "Of course," Tyrion said. "If you wish, Your Grace, the council can meet in the morning and you can share the news. We can also begin preparing for the future so that, regardless of who rules in your place, you and your husband's plans continue on schedule." "That is a fine idea, Tyrion," Margaery said with a smile. "As always, your ability to see 3 steps ahead is amazing." Tyrion returned the smile. "I have good ideas every once in a while." The stunted man turned to leave, before stopping and turning on his heel. "Oh, and Your Grace, it seems as if some of Thoros's captains have come to the city, leading some of the men of the company." Margaery raised an eyebrow. She had thought that the entire company would have accompanied Robb north to fight the White Walkers. Nevertheless, she nodded. "Do they wish to see me?" Tyrion shook his head. "No, Your Grace. They asked for permission for their men to camp outside the city walls." "Of course," Margaery said with a wave of her hand. "Give the captains rooms inside the Red Keep, please. If they have been left here in the south, then they will have months of hard work ahead of them as they stave off the bandits and thieves." Tyrion bowed his head. "As you say, Your Grace." Jon Stark. The land beyond the wall was trapped in a constant blizzard. Harsh northern winds rushed south, snapping branches and sending swirls of snow up into the air, adding yet another layer of thick white dust. It was impossible to see more than 3 or 4 feet in any direction. The ground was a thick layer of snow, as far as the eye could see, and the sky was nothing but a blanket of clouds that were a varying shade of gray. There was little color except for white and gray. Even trees had lost their color and were just dead husks of gray wood, burdened by snow. Jon leaned over Rhaegal's green neck. It served 2 purposes. The first was to keep himself warm. Icy winds whipped around him, feeling as if ice was forming on his bones, and his thick furs and leathers did little to help him on the back of a dragon hovering through the air. Jon had quickly learned that dragons radiated heat, which was helpful in many scenarios such as this. But Jon was also leaning down to get a better look at the ground. He and Daenerys weren't far from the wall. A horse could make it in a few days of hard riding, and a man could make it in a week if he walked. Atop the dragons they had made it in a few hours, and still had plenty of time to get back to the wall. Through the snow and dead trees, Jon could make out a horde of undead shambling forward. Their old bones, torn garments, and fiery blue eyes made it easy for Jon to see them against the snowy ground. Just as his uncle had predicted, there were thousands of them, if not hundreds of thousands, like an unending sea of whites. There weren't just men, women, or children, either. He also caught sight of undead bears, wolves, shadow cats, and giant ice spiders. All were in varying states of decay, like the humans, former humans. They marched beside. What worried Jon even more was the giant white that wadded through the ranks. A massive skeleton with a blue fire burning in its eye sockets, wearing rotting furs from the neck down. What gave Jon at least a little bit of hope was that the snow the whites were trying to get through was giving them problems. For a normal-sized man or woman, the snow came up to their waists, and the undead children were forced to crawl to get over it. "Come, Rhaegal," Jon said, pulling the reins and turning the green and bronze dragon back towards the wall, which loomed in the distance, looking as if it were touching the clouds. After an hour of flying, Daenerys and Drogon joined them, flying just above Jon and Rhaegal. They flew in forced silence for the remainder of the flight. Because of how fast they were moving in the howling wind, there was no chance any of their words could break through. Jon and Daenerys had been flying over the lands beyond the wall for nearly 2 weeks now, searching for any signs of the enemy. Although today was the first day Jon had seen the enemy, he had learned something else long before today. The cold would be just as deadly as the army of undead. Not only would it be a hindrance trying to get any sort of supplies overland, regardless of how many wildlings his father had on the King's Road, well over 3 feet was falling a day, but the men defending the wall have not faced the worst of the storm. It would be demoralizing, and any sense of warmth would be a far-fetched illusion. Even the hardy northerners that had accompanied his father to the wall would have a tough time handling the conditions. Jon shuddered and prayed for those who came from south of the Neck. They were about to fight in the worst elements nature had to offer. Eventually, the 2 dragon riders crossed over the top of the wall, receiving a few waves from the men standing guard at the top, and flying about a few miles south to a hot spring that they had spotted as they flew north from Dragonstone. As soon as the dragons landed, Jon and Daenerys slid out of their saddles, shaking the snow from their furs. "Did you see them?" Jon asked as they walked towards the steaming pool of water, pulling off their gloves so that they could warm their hands. "I saw them," Daenerys replied grimly as they bent down and put their hands in the water, feeling warmth begin to spread to the rest of their bodies. "Thank the gods your brother managed to support the defenses here with men from the south. We should have more coming too. Men from the Stormlands, Doran and the Reach," Jon added, "but they won't be prepared to fight in these conditions." Daenerys shrugged. "We don't have a choice. Even if there was a place south of the Neck we could form a defense. That storm will still hit us hard." "There's no better defense than the wall," Jon said with a shake of his head. "It's our best chance to protect the realm. Without it, we're just delaying the inevitable. Some castles will be able to hold out, but not for long."
"There's that northern optimism that I've grown used to,"
Daenerys joked.
"Robb had it too."
"Ser Jorah still shows signs of it." Jon sniffed and cupped the water in his hands, bringing up and dipping his face in it. His nose felt like an icicle, and he could feel flakes of snow and ice in his beard and eyebrows. "I leave optimism for Robb. That's a problem for a king to handle." "I state the truth," Jon said finally, wiping the warm water from his face so that it didn't freeze. "The wall was made for defending Westeros. No, the world from the others." "Will it hold?" Daenerys asked. "The wall?" Jon asked. "I'm not sure." Daenerys frowned. "You just said that it was made for defending against the others." "It is, but you must remember that it was created by Bran the Builder after the Long Night. It's never actually been used against them," Jon explained. "This will be its first true test." Jon flicked the water from his hands before wiping them dry on the inside of his cloak. The last thing he needed was water droplets turning to ice and freezing into his skin inside his gloves. As he got back to his feet, he inadvertently looked north, wondering if he could see the oncoming storm. He couldn't. "Let's get back to Castle Black and tell my father what we know," Jon said. "War is on our doorstep." Alec Reed. Alec waited in the shadows as the door was slowly eased open. The room was completely silent and sparsely furnished. Moonlight streamed in through one of the windows, illuminating much of the room with a silver light. A single bed lay in the center of the room, the figure of a sleeping man under the blankets. Off to the side was an armor stand that held the white armor of the Kingsguard. A white cloak hung on a peg next to it. The man wore a red surcoat over chainmail and boiled leather, carrying a long sword in one hand and a dagger in the other. His black hair had been tied back with a red ribbon, and his sharp jaw was covered with dark stubble. He approached the bed slowly, carefully placing each step and making no sound. His eyes were trained only on the bed and nothing else. When he was standing over the sleeping figure, he smiled from ear to ear as he reversed the grip on his dagger and plunged it straight down, rocking the bed frame from the force of the strike. The wicked smile that Osney Kettleblack had been wearing just a moment ago disappeared in an instant. As he realized that something was wrong, he pulled back his dagger, and after he saw no blood on the blade, he threw back the covers from the figure he thought was Sarah Loras Tyrell. What in the blazes? Ser Osney cursed as he realized that he had been duped. Sheep's wool is particularly good when faking a sleeping body, Alex said as he and his companion emerged from the dark corner that hid them. The spymaster wore dark leathers and a hooded mantle of the same color, a long, heavy-bladed knife at his side. The real Sarah Loras wore a simple shirt and breeches, unsheathing his sword as he revealed himself. The Queen's brother had a look of utter contempt and hatred on his face, as he prepared himself for a duel. Ser Osney didn't waste any time in trying to defend himself. He had just been caught trying to murder a Kingsguard, the Queen's brother no less. He raised his weapons and charged across the room at Loras, his sword flashing in the moonlight as he struck at the Knight of Flowers. Loras caught his opponent's blade and flicked it away with incredible speed before going on the attack, driving Ser Osney back towards the window. The fight was entirely one-sided. Septon Osney could barely keep up with the younger knight, barely able to bring his sword up time and again. Septon Loras didn't seem to tire in the slightest, as he continued his onslaught. Eventually, Septon Osney's defense faltered, and that's all it took for Septon Loras to end the fight. Kettleblack's eyes rolled into the back of his head as he dropped to the floor. Ser Loras kept his sword raised in case the man was faking, but after a few moments, it was clear that he wasn't. He was well and truly knocked out cold. Alec moved to the door and poked his head out. "Come on in," he said to the waiting gold cloaks. A dozen of Seaworth's best men marched into the room. Two held lengths of chain and shackles that they attached to Ser Osney's ankles and wrists before hauling his unconscious form out of the room. Ser Loras pushed his curls away from his face as he retrieved his scabbard, sliding his sword back home. "You should have let me kill him," he grunted. "Oh, he'll die," Alex said as the two men left the room and headed towards the throne room. "But first we need a confession." Line break. Osney's co-conspirators had also been captured while Alec and Sarah Loras had taken care of Kettleblack. Trent had a nasty gash atop, no doubt from an ill-advised fight from the Hound. Gatch an angry red line that crossed his face from where Ian had smacked him with his bow. Winderly was the only one who didn't look like he had been in a fight. Seaworth must have managed to talk the man out of whatever he had been sent to do. Marga sat on the Iron Throne, her expression a stone mask and a cold look in her eye. Tyrion stood by her side while her grandmother stood just a step down. Sarah Haber and the three knights the king had assigned to help protect the queen stood at the base of the steps. Their number was increased by one when Loras soon joined them. Sarah Devos stood off to the side of the room, opposite of Sansa and the Hound. A mixture of gold cloaks and Ian's guards encircled the room, all armed to the teeth. The atmosphere in the room was incredibly tense. The queen was very popular to everyone in the castle, and any attempt on her life would undoubtedly be met with anger and hatred for whoever tried to take it. The soldiers wanted blood, and the men they wanted it from were right in front of them. When Ser Osney's unconscious form joined his allies on the ground before the throne, the Hound grabbed the bucket at his feet and strode up to the man, splashing his face with freezing cold water. "Get up," he grunted. Osney gasped and sputtered as he was dealt with the shock of cold. He shook his hair and looked around, trying to figure out where he had been taken and what had happened to him. "What?" "Be silent," Margaret snapped before the man could say another thing. "Osney Kettleblack, you are charged with attempted murder, treason, and impersonation of the king's company. What do you say to these charges? I have, Ser Osney babbled, still trying to comprehend what had happened. Silence. Margaery snapped again. Defending yourself will not help you, sir. Your fellow traitor Hugh Blount has already sold you all out. He revealed your entire plan. Linderly and Trant both glared accusingly at the pudgy knight, while Ser Osney was still wordlessly moving his mouth, trying to figure out some way to get himself out of the predicament he found himself in. Finally, his eyes lit up as he seemed to have found his answer. I demand trial by combat, he cried, as is my right as a noble of the realm. Yalek raised an eyebrow. That was his plan? To try and fight his way out? The spymaster shook his head, already knowing what the result would be. I demand trial by combat as well, Trant shouted. Margaery glared at the two men for a moment, before looking over at Blunt and Linderly, waiting to see if they would join their allies. Linderly met the Queen's gaze and merely shook his head. Blunt seemed to be mulling it over before nodding. I also demand trial by combat, he said weakly, as if he wasn't sure. Very well, Margaery said crisply. Unchain Ser Osney and give him back his sword. Loras, will you finish what you have started? The Knight of Flowers turned and bowed his head. It would be my honor, sister. He has no armor, Osney argued as he was released. He is not prepared for a duel. I don't need any. Loras snarled, his cloak pooling at his feet. Your blade won't touch me. I demand a public trial by combat, Ser Osney argued. You tried to murder my brother in the dead of night, like a coward. Queen Margaery countered, every word like a whiplash. You will fight here where you will die like the traitor you are. No one will ever care about your death, and none but those in this room will witness as you are humiliated and slain like the dog you are. Kettle Black took a step back, surprised by the anger in the Queen's voice before nodding and retrieving his weapons from the gold cloaks, who had confiscated them. When his companions were dragged away from the center of the room, the fight began. Ser Osney once again went on the attack, trying to put Ser Loras on the back foot through brute force and savagery. But like before, the Knight of Flowers deflected each attack with minimal effort, walking circles around the Red Knight. As Loras predicted, Ser Osney's blade never touched him. And as the fight continued, the younger man continued to show why he was considered one of the best young swordsmen in all of Westeros. With men like Ser Loras, Jaime Lannister, and Serra Barristan, there was a wide gap between them and men like Ser Osney, who was a decent warrior in his own right. But being decent and being a natural were two very different things. Ser Osney began to slow as his adrenaline and stamina ran out, but he tried to compensate by putting every ounce of his remaining strength into his attacks. Against Ser Loras, who had only been defending himself the entire fight, this proved to be Osney's undoing. With a desperate voice-cracking cry, Ser Osney swung his sword with both hands at Ser Loras, meaning to split him from brains to balls. Ser Loras stopped, moved, and stood still, as Ser Osney's sword descended on him. Without blinking, he deflected the attack and sent Ser Osney lurching as his momentum forced him off balance. As he tried to get his feet back under him, he failed to see Ser Loras's blade come back up and open up his throat in a single fluid motion. Ser Osney Kettleblack had only a second to reach up and feel the blood pouring from his severed throat, before he dropped to the floor, his sword clattering away from his grasp. Ser Loras wiped his blade clean on Ser Osney's surcoat, before sheathing it and retaking his place in front of Margaery. Who's next? Margaery asked simply, to the dead silent room. Robb Stark. Robb sighed as he entered his makeshift office, running a hand over his tired face. He had been forced to settle a dozen disputes in a day, and he had been ready to jump off the top of the wall by the end of it. Free folk, Westerosi, sellswords, and Unsullied occupied the massive fortress of the Night Fort. With such a mixed force, there were inevitable arguments that the men demanded that Robb settle. Jon tried his best to deal with as many problems as Robb, but he was needed on the other side of the wall, keeping an eye on the approaching enemy. The Northern King's attention was demanded at war councils and scouting reports as well. With each passing day, tensions rose higher and higher now that Jon and Daenerys had confirmed that the others were only a week away and getting closer with every passing second. The only time Robb was allowed a modicum of peace was when he was sleeping. After 3 days of madness, Robb had stormed out of the courtyard and slammed his office door shut, intent on taking peace in his own hands. Except Robb wasn't alone in his room. Bran? Robb asked. His brother, who had arrived at the fortress yesterday, was sitting in front of the single frosted window in the room, his eyes a strange shade of milky white. When Robb said his name, Bran returned to normal, and looked at him. "Hello, Robb," he said with his odd, emotionless tone. "I didn't mean to take your room. I needed to find a quiet place." "A feeling I understand all too well," Robb grunted. "Even Tarly is struggling with this lot." Besides Robb, it took the combined experience of Randyll Tarly, Robb's father, Mance Rayder, and Robb himself to keep the mismatched host from falling to pieces. The tension, elements, and obvious differences between the soldiers made it almost impossible for them to find any sort of common ground past the fact that they were all humans. Even that fact was being tested by some of the wildlings, especially the skin changers. "What were you doing just then?" Robb asked curiously, pouring himself some of the watch's shit ale. When he had his drink, he set his chair next to his brother and sat down, both of them staring out the window. "When I was with the three-eyed crow, or the former one I should say, he did not get to show me all that he should have," Bran explained. "We had only a limited amount of time, and there was much I had to learn if I wanted to fly." "All right," Robb said. "I have been keeping watch for the others ever since I was returned south of the Wall, but now that we know where they are, I have been looking at other points in history," Bran explained. "Would you like to see?" Robb raised an eyebrow. "Sure," he said, intrigued. Bran raised his arm and placed it on the armrest of his chair. "Take my arm," he ordered. Robb did as he was told, gently grabbing his brother's skinny arm and waiting to see what would happen next. Thankfully, he didn't have to wait for long, because as soon as Robb took hold, Bran's head snapped back, and Robb had only a second to blink before everything went black. "Lane break. Where are we?" Robb asked, shocked. He immediately let go of Bran's arm and looked around at their surroundings. They were standing on a hill with a bright sun above them and a pleasant breeze blowing. Bran, who was standing now and was nearly as tall as Robb, pointed off in the distance where a massive army had been assembled, a few fields over. Archers covered the hills, and two armored hosts of heavy cavalry flanked each side. The banners flying over the great army showed a golden lion rampaging on a field of red and a green hand on a field of white. "The field of fire," Bran answered, standing beside his brother. "The turning point in Aegon's conquest that made all the other kings of Westeros take notice of the unknown Valyrian." A cacophony of horns sounded from the combined army of the Reach and the Westerlands as a new host marched into view. It was pitifully small, but even from a distance, Robb could see the men marching with unmatched pride and confidence, even when they were outnumbered more than 5-1. The two Starks watched as the battle began. The larger host flanked the Targaryens and sent thousands of knights to smash the center. The smaller army had taken a defensive position, but it was no use. The knights had nearly done their work when ear-deafening roars sounded over the battlefield. 3 dragons, full-grown dragons, soared into battle, each with a silver-haired rider. Even if Robb didn't know the story, he was certain that the army of the Reach in the Westerlands had no hope against dragons. The sight of the flying beasts alone made Robb want to run far away and hide in a cave. It was far different from the feeling Daenerys' creatures gave him. For the next hour, Robb and Bran watched as Aegon and his sister-wives unleashed a fiery hell on the Lannisters and Gardeners. It was unlike anything Robb had ever seen before. There was no way to defeat such creatures. No arrows or spears could reach them. Even a lucky artillery shot would do nothing but piss them off. The Targaryens used dragon fire to forge Westeros into what it is now, Bran explained quietly. Aegon Targaryen changed the game and made it exponentially more dangerous. "How?" Robb asked. "He made it so that only one throne was coveted, so that only one crown was needed," Bran said. "Instead of games being played in all corners of Westeros, from the north to Dorne, King's Landing became the center of it all. He took snakes from all across Westeros and created a viper's pit," Robb said, remembering the term his father always used. "He did," Bran said, holding out his arm. "Come." In the blink of an eye, Robb and Bran appeared in the back of a large tent. Torches sputtered in their brackets, and it was very late at night. In the center of the tent, a dozen men sat around a table, though half were on their feet, yelling at someone else. Given their beards and knack for cursing, these men were Northerners. There were 2 men across from Robb on the other side of the table that were deep in their own conversation. The first man was someone Robb had met before, after he had nearly been killed by the Shadow Demon unleashed by Stannis Baratheon. He was Torrhen Stark, the king who knelt. It was the other man who Robb couldn't place. Brandon Snow, Bran said, somehow reading Robb's thoughts. Torrhen's bastard brother. Robb looked down at himself, surprised that he nor Bran had been noticed.
Can they see us?
No, Bran answered flatly. We are ghosts within memories. All we can do is watch. What are they talking about? Robb asked, gesturing to Torrhen and his bastard brother. Torrhen's war council is trying to decide what to do, Bran explained. About 5 miles south of here is Aegon's host of 45,000 and 3 dragons. Robb couldn't help but admire the courage of the Northmen. Some were pushing for Torrhen to attack and hope that northern valor could win the day. Others wanted to pull back to Moat Cailin and allow the army of the south to destroy themselves against the ruined walls and towers. I take it Brandon doesn't want to do either, Robb said. Brandon Snow is proposing his plan, Bran said, nodding. He wants permission to sneak across to the Targaryen camp and assassinate the 3 dragons. Robb raised an eyebrow. Could he do such a thing? Bran shrugged. Who knows? Robb's talk with Torrhen was nothing but a hazy memory, but there was one thing he had remembered from their talk. He looked around the tent and finally spotted what he was looking for. Lounging in the shadows was a giant white direwolf, intently watching the heated argument raging at the table. Robb watched as Torrhen turned towards the direwolf and locked eyes with it. Some sort of message passed between them before Torrhen slammed his hands on the table, standing up. Immediately, everyone fell silent and waited for their king to give them his answer. Brandon, Torrhen said, looking down at his brother. In the morning you shall negotiate with the Valyrian. Negotiate what? Brandon asked carefully. Our surrender, Torrhen sighed. Your Grace, a massive man went to speak, but a look from the Stark King silenced him. No, Lord Umber, Torrhen said. My mind is made up. I will not risk the lives of my soldiers, my people, my friends, or my family for my pride. Your Grace, please think carefully. Another man tried, but Torrhen shook his head. No, Torrhen said simply. I will bend my knee to the man, this Aegon Targaryen, and let him have his moment in the sun. We are men of the north, and as such have a greater responsibility, for winter is coming, and we must grow strong. For just a moment, Robb felt as if Torrhen wasn't speaking to his bannermen, but to him. The last king of the north stared at where Robb stood, seemingly seeing through the veils that kept them apart. There is one more place I want to take you, Bran said, offering his arm. Just like before, it was a blink of an eye before Robb found himself somewhere else, but it wasn't somewhere new. He was in his and Margaery's chambers in the Red Keep. Standing on the balcony overlooking the city was his wife. She looked as beautiful as ever, with her soft brown hair tumbling down her shoulders. She had a blue shawl pulled tightly across her shoulders with one hand while another rubbed her stomach expectantly. Already Robb could see a slight bump where her hand was. She's pregnant, Robb breathed, feeling the same rush of nervousness and love he felt the last time he learned. She is, Bran nodded. Robb wasn't sure what to say, and he struggled for words, but he eventually sputtered out. Why are you showing me this? It's not enough for you to fight for your realm, or you men, or even your life, Bran explained, folding his hands behind his back. You need to fight so that those who are not even born can see the light of day. Today does not matter, nor tomorrow, or that day after that, or even a month from now. What matters is the future, and that lies in the hands of you and your men. I'm well aware of that, Bran, Robb said, feeling slightly insulted. Are you? Bran countered. It's all well and good to fight for survival, Robb, but this is about mankind's survival, not just yours or those who fight beside you. Robb shook his head and moved away from his brother. He was king. He didn't need to be lectured like he was a child by his little brother. He knew exactly what was at stake with this war. It was either win or everything, and everyone Robb loves or cares about will be gone forever, and it will be his fault. Not that history would remember him for failing. There would be no one left alive to remember what happened. If you wanted to get your point across, it worked, Robb grunted. If I fuck up, then the world is fucked. Life itself, Bran corrected. Robb threw his brother an annoyed expression. We're done here. Bran shrugged and held out his arm. Robb immediately grabbed it and closed his eyes. Line break. When Robb opened his eyes, he and Bran were back in their chairs, staring at the frosted window, except now there was a pounding at the door that hadn't been there before. Robb recognized the voice on the other side of the door as Robber's. "Your Grace, come quick!" Robb grumbled as he marched towards the door and swung it open. Robber's face was pale and nervous-looking compared to Robb's stormy expression. Even Brienne, who stood next to him, looked unnerved by something. "What's happened?" Robb asked carefully. "The others, they've sent a message," Brienne replied, obviously trying hard to sound in control of her emotions. "Where is it?" Robb asked. "You need to go to the top of the wall to see it," Robb explained. Robb didn't waste another second. He moved past his protectors and swept down into the courtyard, passing through a crowd of soldiers who were whispering to each other, trying to figure out what was going on. "We've kept others off the top of the wall," Brienne explained. "Your father and the rest are up there. The king and his Kingsguard moved past the two guards keeping the crowd away from the lift and got in the cage. In a few moments, they were at the top of the wall, surrounded by defensive fortifications and barrels of arrow shafts and oil. Jon was waiting for them, looking more grim than usual.
"You took your time," Jon said.
"I was speaking to Bran," Robb said, waving aside his brother's unasked question. "What's happened? Where's this message?" "You better see for yourself," Jon said, gesturing to where their father and others were waiting. Robb made his way over to them and was immediately given access to the viewing platform. Below, the snowlands spread out, but there was now a color that hadn't been there before. There was red, and a lot of it. Robb felt his gut churn as he looked down at the crude message that had been left in the snow. The enemy had used the dismembered bodies of wildlings to spell out the words, and the sight made Robb want to puke. It read, "Death is coming.